I greet everybody at the lecture on biophysics. This lecture concerns thermodynamics, analysis of human body homeostasis and cell membrane transport mechanisms. The lecture goals and objectives are listed at the next slide. Look here, you can see what are the goals of the lecture. It is the quantification of the human body homeostasis condition via application of thermodynamics model. And number 2, it is the specification of the human cell as open system and membrane transport mechanisms maintaining cell steady state equilibrium. Objectives of the lecture are review of the parameters nomenclature and the basic laws of the thermodynamics physics section. Specification of the energy transformation in the human body. Correctness, justification and application of the thermodynamics model to quantify conditions for the maintaining the human body homeostasis. Review of human cell membrane transport mechanisms, physics aspects, complete the list of the objectives of this lecture. The lecture points are in correspondence with the objectives. These are listed at this slide. First of all, it will be introduction, review of the parameters nomenclature and basic laws of thermodynamics physics section. Under number 2, thermodynamics aspects and quantification of the human body environment energy exchange. Physics methods of person metabolism diagnosis is under number 3. Human body homeostasis conditions thermodynamics specification. It is point number 4 of the lecture. And human cell as open system and membrane transport mechanisms maintaining cell steady state equilibrium. This point completes the list of the lecture's points. Summary and bibliography are 2 more to complete the lecture. Let's start from the first point. It is introduction. It is the review of parameters nomenclature and basic laws of thermodynamics physics section. Thermodynamics was originated as the study of the relationship between mechanical energy and thermal energy. Thermal energy is associated with the disordered motion of the atoms and molecules within a substance. No direct reference is made in thermodynamics to the underlying atomic and molecular physics. The objects under study are referred as the whole collections of structures, in particular atoms and or molecules. These structures are considered as located and closed into the space at some extent. This generalization develops thermodynamics objects model. It is thermodynamic system. And this diagram at this slide illustrates the definition of the thermodynamics model, thermodynamic system. The remaining part of the universe separated from the thermodynamic system structures is named as the surrounding. The extent of a system closure into the space determines the system type. There are three of the thermodynamic system types: open, closed, and isolated. Open systems can exchange both matter and energy with the environment. Closed systems exchange energy but not matter with the surrounding. And isolated system can exchange neither energy nor matter with the surrounding. The complete set of all properties of a system under given condition is called state of the system. The system property measures are mass, number of moles, and volume. The measures of a condition a system is under, a system is at, are temperature and pressure. The state equation relates these measures and strongly determines a system state. The equation of state is mathematical modeling of a system state. For example, the equation of state for an ideal gas of given number of moles that is denoted by n small letter. If pressure and temperature are known, is shown at this slide. It is the simple analytical equation expressing the relation between the properties of the system and the environment condition measures. Note that change in any one state variable is sufficient to change the state of a system. And when one from these variable changes, this leads to transition of the system from one state to another with a new set of parameters describing the properties of the system and condition describing the surrounding characteristics. But at the new state, the relation is left of the same analytical form, but with the different magnitudes of the parameter. A system property measures are distinguishing into intense, independent on a system mass, and extensive, a system mass dependent. These intensive properties whose magnitudes are independent on total amount. Instead, they are dependent on the concentration of substances. Extensive properties, properties whose value depends on the amount of substance present. And you can see the intensive properties: chemical potential, concentration, density, elasticity, and so on. And extensive properties are listed here: energy, entropy, mass, length, volume, weight, and so on. This is the classification of the system property measures. A system energy as a whole is one more parameter describing the property of the system. A system energy as a whole is determined by energy of motion and position into surrounding. The thermodynamic system internal energy includes kinetic energies associated with the translational, rotational, and vibrational motions of the system structures. It also includes the potential energy due to interactions of the particles with one another. Thermodynamic system internal energy is uniquely determined by the macroscopic parameters that characterize the state of the thermodynamic system. So then, internal energy is identified as the system state function. At a given condition, an open system maintains a stationary, steady state equilibrium. The system properties don't change in this state. If the thermodynamic system has been exposed to external influences, it will eventually go to another stationary state. The transition is called as a thermodynamic process. There are two main types of thermodynamic processes: reversible process and the irreversible processes. Processes in which both the system and its surroundings can be simultaneously returned to their initial states after the process has been completed are termed as reversible processes. Processes in which the system and its surroundings can't be simultaneously returned to their initial states after the process has been completed are called irreversible. So the next is the first thermodynamics law. The internal energy of the system is essentially defined by the first law of thermodynamics, which states that energy is conserved. The increase in internal energy of a closed system is equal to the difference of the heat supplied to the system and the work done by the system. Thus, heat is given the system and consumed to increase the internal energy and to perform work against external force. So, this is the energy transformation from thermal form, it is just the heat, into internal energy of the system and by the work done by the system to other forms of the energy. Look here, this is the description, presentation of the isobar isothermal process that takes place when system goes from initial its state to final, and this means the change of the internal energy, the change of the function of state, internal energy. And what are the conditions of that transition of the system? Pressure and temperature are maintained constant. So let's consider this at the example of the gas. Gas expands and volume increases. And this product of the increase of the volume of the gas that is under pressure, under constant pressure, is work done by the gas. So then we can rewrite this equation by how thermal energy is transformed into other types of energy. By that means substituting the symbol of work done by the gas. And look, what do we obtain? We obtain the change of this combination, internal energy and product of pressure of gas and the volume it occupies. And this combination of these two is termed as one more state function, enthalpy function. So, when we talk about the transition from one state to another, we talk about the change of internal energy. But at particular conditions, as in this case, we can implement one more function of state. It is the enthalpy. And the first thermodynamics law we can rewrite by that means as the heat that is supplied to the system equals in its magnitude causes the decrease of the enthalpy. Decrease, you can see this as minus sign. Okay, you can see by how thermodynamics describes and quantifies the processes that are under study. And look here by how the first thermodynamics law is applied to an open system. In application to an open system, the thermodynamics first law is interpreted as the condition of a system steady stationary state. An open system is said to be at a stationary state if energy and mass within system remain constant. This statement is supported by analytical equation under number 1. When first law of conservation of energy is applied to open system, which is in steady state, we will get this equation. This system is to be at steady state if mass and energy within the system remains constant. We can rewrite more detailed this equation, and it may be shown at this form. This equation is also known as steady flow energy equation. The steady state equilibrium is maintained when the intensities of two oppositively directing processes of the exchange between the system and the surrounding with mass and energy are of the same intensities. So, interpretation of the first thermodynamics law, its application, it will be better to say, to describe the behavior, the interaction of the thermodynamic system and the surrounding. Under the first law of thermodynamics, energy can't be created or destroyed. It is passed from one system to another and transforms from one form to another. Any machine can do positive work on external bodies only by receiving a certain amount of heat from the surrounding bodies or by reducing of its internal energy. An important consequence of the first law of thermodynamics is the assertion that it is impossible to create a machine capable of doing useful work without consuming energy from outside and without any changes within the machine itself. This hypothetical machine was called the perpetual engine of the first kind. It can't exist. The quantitative definition of thermodynamics' second law requires a state function that is termed as entropy. According to the Boltzmann, the entropy of a system in a given state is proportional to the logarithm of the thermodynamic probability associated with this state as expressed by this formula. Number 1. The entropy change in a process of a system state change is expressed by formula 2. It is generally true that in any system the processes progress in the direction of an increase in thermodynamic probability and hence in the entropy. The thermodynamic equilibrium is characterized by the maximum of the thermodynamic probability and that of the entropy. The thermodynamics first law can be interpreted as a system internal energy change as work done by a system and part of the internal energy released in form of heat. Heat relates to the system structure's disordered motion energy. A system state of disordered structures is more probable. So then, the increase of the heat leads to the increase of the state probability. The system state probability measure is the entropy. For the isothermal process, the heat amount released can be expressed as the product of the entropy change and temperature. This amount of the energy that is released in form of the thermal energy may be expressed as the product of entropy change and the temperature. In case of the isothermal process, the part of a system internal energy transformed into the work system does is defined as the free energy. The free energy. It is the part of internal energy that system transforms into other forms, actually. The equation under number 1 combines the thermodynamics first and second laws for real irreversible processes. Isothermal processes proceed spontaneously in direction of a decrease in the free energy. The end of the change of state, that is, the equilibrium state, is characterized by the minimum free energy attainable in the given situation. And now, the lecture second point is considered. What is this? It is just the application of that thermodynamics basics and laws was considered to describe the interaction of the human organism with the surrounding and energy transformations inside the human body. It is just the thermodynamics aspects and quantification of the human body environment energy exchange. At any level, from atoms up to the whole human organism, structures perform some kinds of work, in particular mechanical via motion, electric via generation of electric signals. In medical language, these are nerve signals, nerve impulses. This all requires energy, because what are actually these? These are exchanges of energy from one form into other form. All living things require energy to sustain their life processes. Green plants obtain energy directly from the sun through the process of photosynthesis. Plants such as mushrooms, which don't utilize photosynthesis, as well as animals, require food capable of providing chemical energy. In all cases, living plants and animals operate within the constraints described by thermodynamics. Look here at this slide. You can see a human organism energy needs. And let me pay your attention that 70% of total energy consumption are required to keep human organism alive. About 70% of all the energy is are needed to maintain the life of the human organism. And approximately 20% are exchanged in other forms of energy. So, and the next, you can see how change the energy consumption, how it changes energy consumption when a person is involved into some kinds of activities. At rest but awake state, the conversion of energy rate is of that range in watts, and you can see how this range becomes more wide, showing that the energy consumption increases when person is involved into some kinds of activities. Human body metabolism is an oxidation process in which the chemical potential energy of food is released. Cellular respiration allows animal organisms to access the energy stored in carbohydrates, lipids, and other macromolecules through the production of the ATP molecules. The rate of energy consumption while resting but awake is the basal metabolic rate. This depends on age and sex, as shown by the graph at this slide. Efficiency of energy utilization is quantified as well. The efficiency of a human using the chemical energy in food to do useful work can be defined in several ways. The usual convention is to compare the measured rate at which mechanical work is done with the actual metabolic rate during the activity minus the basal metabolic rate. The efficiency in percent may be calculated by this formula. Efficiency of energy utilization, that energy that is released from food. This diagram at this slide illustrates the human metabolism, and it should be stressed, emphasized that the human metabolism is personally unique. Actually, this is the example of the describing the physics processes taking place inside the human body in physiology language, by physiology linguistics. But actually, this diagram illustrates by how the energy is transformed inside the human body from one form to other forms. Look here. What is named in physiology as termed as in physiology as catabolic reactions? It is the oxidation of the molecules that carry energy. These are carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Oxidation of these. And energy is released. Wastes are produced, chemical waste, and these should be removed. So you can see this process of exchange between the organism and surrounding with matter. Matter, substances, fuel foods in particular go inside the human organism, and wastes are removed, go outside of the human organism into the surrounding. Energy that is released when fuel foods are oxidized are not utilized immediately. This energy is not utilized immediately, but instead it is stored at ATP molecules. But it is the real process, and all real processes are irreversible ones. So partly energy released from fuel foods is released into the human body in thermal, is converted into the human body, is transformed into thermal form. And energy that is stored at the ATP molecules is less than was carried by the fuel foods. Then energy that are stored at the ATP molecules is taken to be converted, to be transformed into other kinds of energy. Mechanical energy of contraction of the muscle, electrical energy in form of the nerve impulses, and so on. One more time, this energy that is transformed in these all kinds is accompanied with the energy that is released into the thermal form. And you can see two stages of the heating of the human organism. This heat is not necessary and lead to the disorder of the motion of the molecules and atoms, and this can lead to destroying of the functions of the organs and systems. So the physics shows you thermodynamics in particular, what are the processes of energy transformation inside the human body, and what is a side effect of this. It is the heating. So consequently, the removing of the not necessary heat is required to maintain homeostasis of the human body. So you can see the example by how physiology interprets the physics processes of energy exchanges between the organism and surrounding and energy transformation into the human organism. So, and look, metabolism should be under control because the metabolism is at the core of all processes. This is the process function providing the energy for the human organism. So that is why the metabolism diagnosis is of great importance. And there are two methods to control the intensity of the metabolism. The first method that is represented, it is direct calorimetry. This requires the Atwater chamber. And look, what is this? It is absolutely isolated room with the pipes water flows through. The water through the air is heated by the thermal energy that is released by the human organism that are placed into this room. How much work is done is calculated, is measured as well. So consequently, to summarize the heat energy released by human organism and amount of work the human organism does, this becomes to be the energy consumption, and consequently this is the information how much energy is required to that particular person, individual person, to be involved into that or another kind of physical activity. Total energy requirement is the value is the basal metabolic rate value added to the work done in the activities. It can be measured directly by putting the subject in an isolated room called Atwater chamber after its designer and monitoring all energy exchanges direct, but it is not for routine medical diagnosis, because it is expensive enough and requires special equipment, specially equipped room in particular. And look, method of indirect calorimetry is just for the routine medical practice. Look, what is the idea for this non-direct calorimetry? The idea is based on this oxidation formula process of the fuel food. The major fuel food is glucose, and to oxidate the 1 mole of the glucose, the 6 moles of the oxygen are required. The products of this chemical reaction of the oxidation are the 6 moles of carbohydrate and the carbon dioxide, okay, and 6 moles of water. And these 2.85 kilojoules of energy are released. But when we talk about the glucose only, you can see that 6 moles of oxygen are required, and 6 moles of the carbon dioxide are produced. And when we divide these two volumes, we obtain the respiratory coefficient equals to 1. And this is different when we will take in account the oxidation of 2 more fuel foods, these as fats and proteins. Respiratory coefficient becomes to be different, and it was experimentally obtained that respiratory coefficients in relation with the oxygen energy equivalent. By how much energy is released when the 1 liter of the oxygen is consumed. And after that, if you know how much oxygen is consumed, the energy required, the energy consumption may be calculated by this equation as the product of the oxygen consumed and energy coefficient, energy equivalent of the oxygen. And look here by how this is realized. You can see this as the Look here how this is realized. You can see this bag that is used to store the air that person breathes out. And this chemical analysis of this air is done, determining how much carbon dioxide and oxygen person breathes out. Person breathes out. And look, this actually is the combination of two methods, indirect and direct calorimetry, to obtain the more accurate data. And the combination and this indirect calorimetry may be used to measure metabolism by determining the amount of oxygen consumed and carbon dioxide produced. And this technique, realization of this technique is shown here. The test may be used to measure cardiovascular and respiratory function. And look, now we start to consider the human body homeostasis condition, thermodynamics specification. Human body can be studied in its exchange with the surrounding by implementation the thermodynamics model open thermodynamic system. Human temperature is normally kept constant by heat transfer to the surroundings. This means that Q is negative. Human body usually does work on the outside world. This means work magnitude is positive. So the human body loses internal energy is negative. And what else may be said? Human body can be specified as an open thermodynamic system, and human body homeostasis in terms of thermodynamics is the stationary steady state at which all system properties are remained constant. All processes of energy transformation in human organism are accompanied with the release of some energy in form of heat. The only part of this heat is required to maintain the human constant temperature. The rest of the heat should be removed. So it is the evidenced conclusion about by how the energy is transformed inside the human body. All processes of this are accompanied with the heating of the human organism because some of the energy is transformed into the thermal form. Warm-blooded animals such as mammals control their own temperatures by regulating the heat loss from their bodies. The body can lose energy by conduction, convection, radiation, evaporation of respiration, breathing out warm air and water vapor, and excretion. The relative importance of each depends on the condition of the body and its surrounding. What is the distinguishing feature? It is not the only list of the processes, the only description of the processes by words, but also it is the quantification of the processes and the properties of the objects. And look how this is done in this particular case when we consider the energy, removed heat, thermal energy that is removed from inside of the human organism outside into the surrounding. Look, let's start from this. Radiation. The term radiation is another word for electromagnetic waves. In a hot object, the atomic charges oscillate rapidly, sending out energy as electromagnetic waves. That waves travel with speed of light equals to 3 times 10 to the power 8 meter per second. The energy carried by the waves depend on the motion of the charges and hence on the temperature. Every object at a non-zero temperature emits some radiation at all wavelengths. The amount of energy radiated at each wavelength depends on the temperature. The wavelength at which the radiation is most intense is given by wind displacement law. This maximum energy radiated wavelengths depends on temperature and is determined by wind displacement law. All other mechanisms releasing the thermal energy are listed here and illustrated at this slide. And the contributions to rate of heat loss for a typical human adult are listed in the slide. And as I said already, when physics describes the process, it answers to the question, how much is this process of? And you can see that formulas that can be used to calculate how much heat, thermal energy is released by different mechanisms. And now look how the implementation of the thermodynamic model as system is implemented, is applied to write down strong analytical equation expressing the human body homeostasis condition. Human body homeostasis condition is this. If the body temperature is held constant, then the heat losses are related with the heat generated by metabolism by this equation. So you can see these possibilities, this opportunity to quantify, to express the processes and properties of the human body by quantities that can be measured or calculated independently on researcher. And one more application of physics is implemented in medical practice. Look here. Infrared radiation is estimated by all objects with a temperature above absolute zero, according to the Stefan's law. You can see this amount of energy that is radiated by any object surface that is not at absolute zero temperature. Human bodies at room temperature will radiate in infrared region, for which all human skin has an emissivity of almost 1. Infrared thermography, thermal imaging, and thermal video are examples of infrared imaging science. Thermographic cameras detect radiation in the long infrared wavelength range of the electromagnetic spectrum from 9 up to 14 micrometers and produce images of that radiation called thermograms. The amount of radiation emitted by an object increases with temperature, therefore, thermography allows one to see variations in temperature. Alternative medicine practitioners promote its use for breast screening despite the FDA warning that those who opt for this method instead of mammography may miss the chance to detect cancer at its earliest stage. Here you can see thermography technique to obtain the photo thermograms that look like these ones. You can see the abnormality is clear imaged, and this is evidenced diagnosis. Thermography is used to detect direct circulation problems such as those occur in diabetes and gangrene. What is the conductor of the heat, delivering the heat to the skin, and after that the heat as in form of electromagnetic energy is released outside. It is the blood, so the poor circulation looks like a white region at the thermogram. And when the treated circulation is restored, this becomes a different thermogram. Evidenced diagnosis based on the physics method, thermography. And now let's look at one more. Let's recognize the one more biological structure within the human organism that may be described implementing the thermodynamic model as the thermodynamic open system. Human cell is correct to be described by thermodynamic open system model, because it is in correspondence with the description of this model and in correspondence with the description by how it is interacts with the surrounding. The cell membrane is selectively permeable to ions and organic molecules and controls the movement of the substances in and outside of the cells. The movement of the substances across the membrane can be either passive, occurring without the input of cellular energy, or active, requiring the cell to expend energy in transporting the substances. Here you can see the structures that provide that motions of the substances through the membrane. You can see two kinds of the transmembrane proteins, integral proteins. One kind of the proteins develop the channels for the free motion of the ions, but channels are selective. One channel allow to cross it the only potassium ion, in particular when we talk about the nerve cell, and one kind of channel is just for the sodium ion free motion. And the one more kind of the transmembrane proteins is just an active transporter of the ions. It works as the pump, pumping the ions from area with the lower concentration to the area of the higher concentration. The pump carries potassium inside the cell and develops the high concentration of potassium inside the cell, and the sodium is carried in opposite direction. These ions are removed, pump in outside the cell, and after this ions can diffuse freely through the channels. So you can see this exchange between the cell and surrounding with matter. The sodium potassium pump transports sodium out of cell while moving potassium into the cell. This requires the energy, and this energy is taken from the ATP molecules. So, and look here, one completed cycle of the sodium-potassium pump. This is just the illustration of this completed cycle. Cytoplasmic sodium binds to the sodium-potassium pump. It is the first. Then sodium binding stimulates phosphorylation of the ATP, and you can see 3 sodium ions bind to the integral transmembrane protein, and after this ATP is broken down, is hydrolyzed, it will be better to say, into smaller parts, into ADP and phosphate acid fragment. The next, potassium is released and sodium sites are receptive again. The cycle repeats. So, phosphorylation causes the protein to change its conformation, expelling sodium to the outside. Loss of the phosphate restores the protein's original conformation. Extracellular potassium binds to the protein, triggering release of the phosphate group. So this is the description of one sodium-potassium pump complete cycle. This cell possesses more detail. You can see it here. Sodium and potassium leakage channels that allowed these cations to diffuse down their concentration gradient. The neurons have far more potassium leakage channels than sodium leakage channels. Therefore, potassium diffuses out of the cell at a much faster rate than sodium leaks in. Because more cations are leaving the cell than are entering the interior of the cell to be negatively charged relative to the outside of the cell. Chlorine ions tend to accumulate outside of the cell because they are repelled by negatively charged proteins within the cytoplasm. This property to separate charges by mechanisms of the cell membrane is measured by the voltage. The gauge voltmeter shows the voltage as the potential difference between between 2 points, outside and inside of the cell. Because of different concentrations of the ions and presence of the anions into the cell, this makes the interior of the cell to be negatively charged. And outside, the different electric field is developed. And to reveal these two electric fields, two electrodes connected to the voltmeter are placed inside and outside. And voltage around minus 70 millivolts is measured, showing the negativity of the interior of the cell. In physiology language, this is termed as the cell resting membrane potential. But actually, it is the potential's difference inside and outside the cell. That is, in physics language, is termed as the voltage. So, at non-changing condition, this property is maintained, and this is termed as the steady state equilibrium of the cell, in particular of the nerve cell. So you can see one more example of the biological object that can be modeled its behavior and property by physics model. And this property is measured and expressed by physics quantity. It is the voltage. And finally, the summary of the lecture. The physics model as the thermodynamic system is correctly used to quantify the processes of energy exchange of the human body with the environment. Thermodynamics theory conclusively describes, explains the processes of energy transformation in the human body. Physics methods allowed objective diagnosis of human body metabolic processes. And finally, this is the list of the references you can take to get details on the theme we considered. We finish lecture. Thank for attention.